Ethan Parker adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, the faint clink of metal echoing in the silence of his Manhattan penthouse. The room was a testament to his success. Sleek modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline, and a glass desk adorned with an impeccable leather-bound planner. Every aspect of Ethan's life was meticulously controlled, from his wardrobe to his daily schedule, leaving no room for surprises. As he prepared for another late-night meeting, his phone vibrated against the polished surface of his desk. The screen displayed an unknown number. He hesitated. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. With a sigh, he picked up. "This is Ethan Parker," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "Mr. Parker," a woman's voice came through, tinged with urgency. "This is Nurse Harris from St. Mary's Hospital. I need to speak with you about Samantha Grant." The name froze Ethan mid-thought. Samantha, a name from a past he had carefully buried beneath layers of ambition. He had not seen her in years. "There must be some mistake," Ethan replied sharply. "I haven't spoken to her in—" "She passed away earlier tonight," the nurse interrupted, her tone softening. "During childbirth. And she named you as the father of the child." For a moment, Ethan could only hear his own heartbeat. The words father and child felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. "The child, is she—" His voice faltered, the rare slip of uncertainty catching him off guard. "She's healthy," the nurse confirmed, "but she needs you. We need you to come to the hospital immediately." Ethan ended the call, his hand trembling slightly as he placed the phone down. Outside the window, the city continued its restless glow, indifferent to the storm brewing inside him. For the first time in years, Ethan Parker's meticulously constructed world felt utterly out of his control. The hum of the city faded as Ethan Parker stepped through the automatic doors of St. Mary's Hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit him immediately, a sharp contrast to the polished leather and mahogany scent of his usual surroundings. His polished Oxford shoes clicked against the linoleum floor, drawing subtle glances from passing nurses. "This way, Mr. Parker," said a nurse, her tone professional but tinged with sympathy. She led him down a long corridor lined with rooms where lives hung delicately in the balance. Ethan's chest tightened with each step, his mind racing with fragments of memories of Samantha, her laughter, the faint scent of her perfume, and the way she had once challenged the impenetrable walls of his orderly world. The nurse stopped outside a room and gestured for him to enter. The door was ajar, spilling faint fluorescent light into the dim hallway. Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering near the doorknob. He inhaled deeply, then stepped inside. The room was small and quiet, save for the faint hum of medical equipment. A clear bassinet sat in the corner, holding a bundle wrapped in pale pink blankets. Ethan's gaze was drawn to it instantly, his feet moving as though pulled by an invisible force. "Your daughter," the nurse said softly, stepping aside to give him room. The word daughter hung in the air, foreign and unfamiliar. Ethan's eyes locked on the tiny figure nestled in the blankets. Her delicate face was impossibly small, her skin flushed with a newborn's softness. A tuft of dark hair framed her forehead, and her eyelids fluttered in a dream. He stood frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the bassinet. The magnitude of the moment pressed against him like the weight of the skyscrapers outside. "She's healthy," the nurse continued, her voice breaking through his haze. "But she needs care, and she needs you." Ethan hesitated, the distance between him and the child feeling insurmountable. "I don't even know her," he murmured, almost to himself. The nurse offered a gentle smile. "You'll have time to get to know her. For now, she just needs someone to hold her." Before he could respond, the nurse lifted the baby with practiced ease and placed her gently into his arms. Ethan stiffened, his movements awkward and uncertain. The baby stirred at the change in position, her tiny fist brushing against his chest. Ethan looked down at her, his breath catching. The weight of her was startling, not heavy, but substantial in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "She's so small," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "And she's yours," the nurse said, stepping back to give him space. For the first time in years, Ethan Parker felt something unfamiliar crack through his carefully controlled exterior. Vulnerability. The penthouse was unrecognizable by the end of Ethan's first week with Lyla. What had once been a haven of pristine minimalism, a sanctuary of sharp edges, sleek surfaces, and muted tones, now bore the undeniable marks of chaos. A bassinet sat awkwardly near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by hastily unpacked baby supplies. A pile of onesies, bottles, and blankets occupied his leather couch. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the instructions for formula preparation as if they were written in another language. His usually unshakable confidence had been reduced to uncertainty as he fumbled with the bottle's components. "Okay," he muttered under his breath, glancing at Lyla, who lay in her bassinet, her tiny face scrunched in protest. "We'll figure this out." After what felt like an eternity, Ethan managed to assemble the bottle and test the temperature against his wrist, his Google search instructions replaying in his mind. He approached Lyla cautiously, lifting her awkwardly as she let out a wail that pierced the quiet room. "I'm trying," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I'm trying." Lyla latched onto the bottle, her cries subsiding into soft gulps. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, sinking onto the couch. The tension in his shoulders didn't ease entirely, but the quiet felt like a small victory. By the third night, exhaustion had completely overtaken him. He sat on the edge of his bed, his once crisp shirt now crumpled and stained with formula. His tie lay abandoned on the floor, and his usually sharp eyes were bloodshot. Lyla's cries echoed through the penthouse, relentless and unyielding. "I need help," Ethan admitted to the empty room. The next day, help arrived in the form of Emma, his younger sister. A whirlwind of energy and practicality, Emma swept into the penthouse armed with a box of diapers and a sharp tongue. "You look like you've been through a war," she remarked, taking in Ethan's disheveled appearance. "I feel like it," he muttered, gesturing to the cluttered living room. "This is harder than I thought." Emma crouched by Lyla, who was lying on a blanket on the floor, her tiny arms flailing. "You need a system," she said, tickling Lyla's tummy and earning a delighted coo. "And probably some sleep." "I need a miracle," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. Over the next few days, Emma became a fixture in Ethan's life, guiding him through the intricacies of parenting. Together, they reorganized the penthouse, transforming one of the guest rooms into a cozy nursery. At first, Ethan balked at the pastel walls and tiny furniture, but as the crib was assembled and shelves were lined with books and stuffed animals, he found himself lingering in the doorway, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're doing better than you think," Emma said one evening, watching as Ethan rocked Lyla to sleep. Her words gave him a flicker of confidence, but it wasn't until Lyla's first smile that he truly began to feel it. One quiet afternoon, as Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor with Lyla on his lap, she looked up at him, her tiny face breaking into a crooked, radiant grin. It was fleeting, but it pierced through his exhaustion like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan froze, staring at her in awe. "You're smiling," he whispered, a laugh escaping despite himself. "You're really smiling." In that moment, something shifted within him. The fear and doubt that had weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose he had never known. Ethan Parker, a man who once prided himself on control and logic, was discovering a new side of himself, a side that thrived not on perfection, but on love and resilience. The changes in Lyla began subtly. At first, Ethan noticed that she seemed more tired than usual, curling up on the couch instead of eagerly playing with her toys. Her giggles, once a constant melody in the penthouse, grew fewer and farther between. "She's probably just teething," Emma suggested during one of her visits, though her voice held a flicker of concern as she watched Lyla rub her eyes and yawn while lying against Ethan's chest. But when small, unexplained bruises began appearing on Lyla's arms and legs, places where no toddler should bruise, Ethan couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening after Lyla had fallen asleep, he sat by her crib, staring at the faint yellowing marks on her pale skin. His chest tightened with unease. The next morning, Ethan brought Lyla to her pediatrician. The brightly painted office, with its cartoon animals and cheerful murals, felt like a cruel mockery of his growing fear. Lyla clung to his tie, her head resting against his chest as he explained her symptoms to the doctor. "She's been very tired lately," Ethan said, his voice tight. "And these bruises? They don't make sense. She hasn't fallen or bumped into anything." The doctor's face grew serious as she examined Lyla, her cheerful demeanor replaced by quiet professionalism. "I'd like to run some blood tests," she said gently. Ethan nodded, his stomach knotting as he watched the nurse draw blood from Lyla's tiny arm. She whimpered, her face scrunching in protest, and Ethan held her close, whispering softly to calm her. Hours later, the doctor returned with the results, her expression grave. She sat across from Ethan, clasping her hands together. "Mr. Parker," she began carefully, "Lyla's blood work shows signs consistent with leukemia. We'll need further tests to confirm the diagnosis and determine the type, but I want to prepare you for what lies ahead." Ethan felt as though the air had been knocked out of him. The word leukemia echoed in his mind, incomprehensible and terrifying. He tightened his hold on Lyla, who was dozing peacefully in his arms, oblivious to the weight of the diagnosis. "It's treatable," the doctor continued, her tone steady but kind. "With the right approach, we can manage this. But we'll need to act quickly." Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched as he fought to maintain composure. "What do we need to do?" "First, we'll begin chemotherapy," the doctor explained, "and we'll also need to look for a compatible bone marrow donor. Family members are often the best match." Without hesitation, Ethan replied, "Test me. I'll do whatever it takes." The swab was quick, but the waiting felt eternal. Days later, when the call came, Ethan answered on the first ring. "Mr. Parker," the nurse said gently, "I'm sorry, but your test shows you're not a match for Lyla." The words hit him like a blow, but the nurse wasn't finished. "There's something else," she continued hesitantly. "Lyla's blood type is incompatible with yours. We've double-checked, and it suggests you're not her biological father." Ethan froze, the phone trembling in his hand. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Memories of holding Lyla for the first time flooded his mind, making the words feel like an unbearable betrayal. "Run the tests again." "We'll confirm," the nurse said, "but the results are unlikely to change." As the call ended, Ethan sank into the nearest chair, his mind reeling. Lyla wasn't his biological daughter. Yet, as he looked at her small, fragile form sleeping soundly, one thing remained unshaken. She was his daughter in every way that mattered. The hospital waiting room was quiet except for the soft murmur of voices and the rhythmic shuffle of nurses' shoes. Ethan sat rigidly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his mind replaying the nurse's words over and over. Not her biological father. The door opened, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Ethan's breath caught as his gaze locked onto Samantha Grant. She stood there, poised yet out of place in her tailored black coat and heels, her expression unreadable. "You're alive," Ethan said, his voice low, disbelief mingling with anger. "It's been a while," Samantha replied calmly, her tone measured, as though her sudden appearance required no explanation. Ethan rose to his feet, his fists clenching at his sides. "A while? You faked your death, Samantha. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? What you've put her through?" His voice rose with every word, raw with fury and betrayal. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice soft but unflinching. "What does that even mean?" Ethan demanded, taking a step closer. "Explain." Samantha sighed, her composure cracking slightly. "I was desperate. After you, I made mistakes, financially, emotionally. The man I was with left me when he found out I was pregnant. I had nothing, no way to support her. So I made the only choice I thought I had. By abandoning her, by abandoning me?" Ethan's voice wavered, hurt cutting through his anger. "I knew you'd take care of her," Samantha replied. "You've always been dependable, Ethan. I couldn't do it, but I knew you could." Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. "You didn't know anything about me. You didn't give me a choice." "I didn't have a choice either," Samantha shot back, her voice rising for the first time. Do you think it was easy, watching from the sidelines all these years, knowing she was better off with you than with me? Ethan frowns. Watching? Samantha hesitated, then admitted, I kept tabs. I needed to know she was safe. The audacity of her confession left Ethan momentarily speechless. And now you're here. Why? Samantha's gaze softened. Because she's sick, Ethan. I can help. My marrow will likely be a match, but... Her voice trailed off. But what? Ethan asked coldly, suspicion flickering in his eyes. I need something in return, Samantha said carefully. Enough money to start fresh. Far away. Europe, maybe. Ethan stared at her, his body rigid with rage. You're using your daughter's life as leverage for a payout? Samantha didn't flinch. Call it survival. You're a businessman. You understand deals. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak, his emotions swirling between fury and desperation. Finally, he said, Fine, you'll get your money. But if you ever hurt her again, if you so much as think of contacting her without my permission, you'll regret it. Samantha nodded, a faint smirk on her lips as though she had already won. I'll do what I need to do. For her. Ethan watched her leave, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. A storm of anger, regret, and desperation swirled inside him, but as he looked down at the photo of Lyla on his phone, the chaos began to settle. His jaw tightened with resolve. No matter what it takes, I'll protect you. The operating room doors swung open, and Ethan shot to his feet, his breath catching as Dr. Patel approached. The procedure went well, she said with a reassuring smile. Lyla is stable and in recovery. Ethan exhaled shakily, gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. She's okay? She's okay, Dr. Patel confirmed, but she'll need time to heal. She's strong, Mr. Parker. Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with relief. As Dr. Patel left, he leaned against the wall, his eyes closing as the weight of the past weeks began to lift. When he entered the recovery room, Lyla lay nestled in the hospital crib, her tiny hands curled into fists above the pale pink blanket. Her cheeks were still pale, but the steady rise and fall of her chest gave Ethan hope. He gently reached into the crib, his large hand brushing against her soft, fragile fingers. Lyla stirred slightly, her lips parting in a soft sigh. I'm here, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. You're safe now. He sat by her side, his fingers lightly wrapping around hers. As Lyla's tiny hand grasped his instinctively in her sleep, Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders melt away. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe they were going to make it through this. The penthouse was no longer a cold fortress, but a warm haven. Ethan sat by the window, cradling Lyla in his arms. The pale morning light streamed through the curtains as she babbled softly, her tiny hands clutching his finger. You're gonna be okay, Ethan whispered, his voice steady with quiet determination. As Lyla's tiny hand rested in his, Ethan realized how much she had changed him, not just his life, but his heart. We both will. As Lyla drifted back to sleep, Ethan gazed out at the city, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in his life, he felt whole.